I will probably cover stuff on service and therapy dogs relatively quickly so that we can get to some more questions. So I will be talking a little bit about service and therapy dogs, and then Bob will finish up with USAR dogs, and then we're going to get to questions a little bit. So again, we have to kind of look at history, where we came from. When we look at how dogs were meant to help people with disabilities, and the first occurrence was actually in 1780. It's a long frickin' time ago, when over in France, at this hospital, there was the first attempt to train a dog for somebody with a visual impairment. And I've skipped a lot of history of stuff, so I've condensed it a lot. But the first working dog in the United States was Buddy. And he was trained in 1928 by Dorothy Eustace for a gentleman by the name of Frank Morris, after he saw an article about her guide dog program over in England, and he contacted her and she trained a dog for him, and that was the first dog placed in the United States. It was a German Shepherd. After that, she also started the Seeing Eye School in Morristown, New Jersey. So that's kind of where assistance dogs started. And believe me, there's a discrepancy between some of the verbiage. What the government calls a service dog, I think basically we would call, that sounds really, really reverby, we would call an assistance dog. I look at an assistance dog as kind of the umbrella term over a service dog, which is for a dog with, for somebody with a physical disability, a hearing dog, and typically a seizure response dog can qualify underneath that service dog as well. And then there's a guide dog that is also a type of assistance dogs. And now we have added the PTSD dogs. So the verbiage between service dogs and assistance dogs can be a little bit wishy-washy depending on where you look. But again, the history of the dogs working for people with disabilities started that long ago. But then in 1956, after they've been working with these dogs for guide dogs over there, they realized that, you know what, we might be able to do something to make our dogs a little bit better. So they developed a puppy walker program, 1956. And what they did is they actually had people that would come and they would take their puppies for walks into the city where they were going to work, which had never happened before. All the dogs were actually raised in the facility and trained in the facility, and they pretty much never left the facility until they were placed with as a guide. And they started having lots of problems. So they started to realize that maybe if we took the puppies out at a younger age and actually exposed them to an environment where they're going to be working, we might actually have a little bit better success. And voila, they did. They also then, a couple years later, decided to start breeding for specific characteristics as well. And again, this was over in Germany and the UK, and the first breeding dog was actually a German Shepherd dog named Rainer. And of course, all of this was done basically to try to increase the suitability of the dogs, but at this point in time, it's still determined by genetics, and they've now added the aspect of some socialization to their program. We don't have a lot of data on their training methods, but military, that's where most of the training came from, so we can assume that even back then it was pretty harsh. Now we move into when the service dogs, what I call service dogs for people with physical disabilities, it started in the 60s and early 70s, and this is the first dogs that actually were trained to help people with a physical disability. And this came, how many of you are familiar, especially in the service dog field, with a lady by the name of Bonnie Bergen? Yeah, you should know Bonnie Bergen. She's actually the reason that we have service dogs, if you really want to know the truth, because she observed donkeys in South America helping people with disabilities. And she came home and said, how can we do this with dogs? And so she started the process. In 1976, the first incident of dogs being used for people with hearing disabilities was started. And then in 1986 was kind of a monumental thing when a bunch of groups got together and created the Assistance Dogs International organization. They set minimum standards for training and placement. They tried to facilitate communication between the programs that were now training service, hearing, seizure response dogs. It was ironic. This is kind of when I was God, I'm old, was really starting to get into it a little bit. And I remember attending some of the early ADI conferences. And there used to be a lot of, well, we train this way and we're not going to tell you. And we train this way and we're not going to tell you. And it was probably 1994, I went to the first Spirit conference. Is anybody familiar with the Spirit conference? I think there were like 6 organizations that got together, really small groups that got together, and we went to California and we traded secrets. Oh my God, clicker training was just starting to become popular back then. So anyway, the ADI started to facilitate that communication and learning between programs, because in the beginning it was really, this is the way we train it and it's proprietary, you can't learn it. We're not going to show you how we taught that dog to do this task. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. So that was a help for that. But a big thing was to actually educate the public about the use of dogs for people with disabilities. Because in all honesty, in some areas of the country and in some countries, it was very frowned upon to have dogs working for us. It was taboo. Dogs don't work for us. They should be free. They should be able to do whatever they want to. We have a little bit of that still going on, but educating the public was a big part of the ADI's initial standards. So in 1990, because of all the public outcry about being able to use a dog in public, 1990, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed, and it addressed concerns regarding utilizations of service dogs in public. Again, this is really brief history. There's a lot more to it. In 1996, we started to see the use of dogs for children with autism. It's kind of a new field. It's not been that long ago. And in 2012 is when we really started to see the dogs being used for veterans with PTSD from the combat arena. So we've come a long way from guide dogs now all the way to dogs working for veterans. I'm going to go ahead now. I'm kind of intertwining the service and therapy dog stuff. We're going to get through this as fast as I can. The first therapy dog was 1863. It's a long time ago. And it was a little dog in Gettysburg. That one of the gals there decided that she saw a little dog named Sally, and it was adopted, and she started bringing it to the hospitals, and she started to see the impact that it had on the soldiers that were injured, and voila, Sally was the very first therapy dog. In 1961, we started seeing a benefit to therapy dogs working with children. How many of you know who Risa Van Fleet is? Yeah. She does some amazing work with animal-assisted play therapy. And in 1976, Therapy Dogs International was founded. So where do we get a service dog or an assistance dog? Well, unfortunately, pretty much anywhere you want to. There's nonprofit organizations, there's large organizations. I'm not going to read all of this. Typically, there's different types of nonprofit organizations. Some of them have facilities where the dogs are trained. Some of them have facilities where the puppies are raised, the dogs are trained, the handler comes in and they train in that facility. Sometimes the facilities are where they train the dogs, and then the dogs go out into the real world and they work with a field representative. There's every imaginable configuration of how a service dog organization might work. Typically, we call a larger organization more than 25 dogs placed annually. And then we have a small organization, is same concept here, is that we may train less than 25 dogs. Again, there may be a facility, there may not be a facility. We may have dogs that are trained in trainers' homes. There's several programs here. How many of you have actually trainers in homes that dogs are one-on-one? You train one dog for one client at a time. It's very common. It's kind of a new marketing business profile for a lot of trainers out there now. And typically those dogs are placed locally only. And then of course we do have those for profit, right? We have trainers out there that's how they make their living. I actually ran into somebody the other day who actually breeds her own dogs, trains her own dogs, and places her own dogs. I thought that was kind of unusual. It was an Australian Shepherd breeder. She actually has some lovely dogs, and she has some lovely working dogs. But I found that that was interesting, and she does sell them for upwards to $20,000 to $25,000 trained. And then, of course, we have professional trainers like some of you that get into the business, and you're trained and placed by a professional trainer. Typically, you stay local because you're going to stay where you typically want to work. And then we have the group of people with disabilities that are training their own dogs. And I have to admit, when I was really heavy into the assistance dog field and started coming across these people that were trying to train their own dogs, I thought, oh, this will never work. And I had one gal that changed my mind. She came to every group class that we offered. She trained her own dog. The first dog she trained was an Australian Shepherd. She worked for American Airlines. And she took that dog. She did a really nice job with him, but she knew after a couple years that he wasn't fit for the job, so she career changed him. She got another dog. She started all over. It was a Golden Aussie mix. And she is on her third dog now. She has a golden retriever. All of these dogs she has trained herself, and I will put her up against anybody out there. So she's the one that changed my mind about self-trained dogs, but she also put in a lot of time and effort into it, a lot. And she uses a group. There's actually a group in my area that facilitates people who want to train their own dogs. So it's a nonprofit organization that actually facilitates people who want to train their own dogs. They do public outings. I've presented and spoken at their group for their handlers. And of course, then some of these people still have to reach out to professional trainers for assistance. Some of them look online for assistance, and some of them are just flying by the seat of their pants.
Is that group national or locally to you?
It's locally to me. It's called Ideal Service Dogs. The owner is Maureen Bennett, lovely lady, but she typically takes on about 6 dogs a year. 6 clients and dogs a year is about all she does. I think she's booked to 2019. Service dog disciplines, I'm not going to name them all because we do a lot. We expect a lot out of these dogs, I would say. So there are some of the disciplines. One of the most fascinating ones that I remember was a dog that was a heart attack detection dog. DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit. He had a golden retriever. The dog saved his life 3 times. Was able to predict. Now granted, the first time it was kind of I have no idea what just happened, but my dog's telling me something, and he went to the doctor. He was having a heart attack. And not only does dog save his life 3 times, but in the office he saved somebody else's life who was also having a heart attack.
Actually, my retired working dogs are all heart attack dogs because Karen constantly said those dogs are going to be the death of her.
Yeah. And there are a few organizations out there that are doing combo dogs, guide service dogs. That's a tough one to crack right there. Talking about therapy dogs, she had asked me a little bit about some of the therapy dog organizations out there, and they're plentiful. These are some of the larger dogs organizations. Pet Partners used to be Delta Society. Therapy Dogs International. Alliance of Therapy Dogs used to be Therapy Dogs, Inc. So there was TDI and TDI. Therapy Dogs International and Therapy Dogs Incorporated. So they recently just changed to Alliance of Therapy Dogs. Again, these are some of the bigger ones that are out there, but there are many, many chapters of these large organizations, and then there are small organizations all over. And what do we do with a therapy dog? It's changed a lot from the first time when I started doing therapy work. And I never officially did a therapy work. I remember taking my dog, my first competition dog, and you're sitting down, so I'll say it, he was a Chow Chow. He's actually the reason I got into behavior, surprise, surprise. But the reason I got into behavior was because he saved my life after I was assaulted. And he developed a problem with the type of people who had assaulted me, and so I had to work through that, and that's how I got into behavior. I have no real schooling. It's all learned by the seat of your pants, so to speak. But I used to take him to a little nursing home in my town, And I'll never forget this gentleman. He was actually a veterinarian who was now in the nursing home. And I would bring my dog into the home, and he'd say, "Chow chow, bad dog." I'm like, "No, really, he's a good dog." And so I'd ignore him, and I'd go on and do my therapy visit. A couple weeks later, "Chow chow, bad dog." I'm like, "No, he's a pretty good dog." "Chow chow, good dog?" "Yeah, he's a pretty good dog." "Okay, maybe." And then pretty soon, after about 6 months, it was "Chow chow, great dog, great dog, great dog." And I pretty much got out of it the day he died. It was really hard on me. And I can't even imagine. I personally think therapy dog handlers are some of the most giving people. And I think therapy dogs have to be some of the most stable dogs out there. So there's some of the disciplines that they work into. I think college classrooms is relatively new. Airports is new. How many of you ran into a therapy dog on your route here? Courtroom dogs, we have several clients that have newfies that are courtroom dogs. These dogs, actually, the children for the Children's Advocacy Center, the children talk to the dogs while the lawyers listen. And then, of course, the crisis response. A lot of the dogs at 9/11, even his working dog at 9/11, did a lot of therapy work because there were a lot of firefighters who were crying big old tears while they were holding the faces of those service dogs. So when I look at where we are today, and we talk about training, handler training. So for service dogs, for handler training for people not with PTSD, again, I have to go back to the minimum standards of the ADI, because at least they have standards. And I think most organizations that I know of try to adhere to some of their standards, if not exceed them. I would highly hope that all the organizations out there would meet and or exceed minimum standards of the Assistance Dogs International. But they did make standards about application screening and matching process. I know when I was a field representative, part of my task was to interview the client. And it was really hard for me to walk out of that house going, "Yeah, you don't get a dog. You can't handle a dog. You don't have what it takes to be a partner with a dog." And there were minimum standards set in order to help screen that process. And of course, we had to educate the handlers about the partnership and to provide lifetime follow-up and team support. And this is one of the things that bothers me the most is I see service dog organizations cropping up left and right. And they're taking advantage of so many people. And it's really, really sad for me to see that. There's typically no emphasis on canine behavior, body language, possible common behavior problems, let alone behavior modification. And there's probably a pretty good reason for that. They don't educate them about it because they can't handle it. So for veterans with military-related PTSD, however, the standards are a lot more intense. And this is just a tip of the iceberg when you look at the ADI's minimum standards for working with people with PTSD. They now put special emphasis on having help from the mental health industry because suicide is prevalent and anger management issues are also very common. So they put real big emphasis on working with a mental health care provider, and also that the veteran themselves has to be able to supply 2 individuals that are going to be available 24/7. So if that veteran needs help, they can pick up a phone and they can call 2 people. That veteran, when they apply, they have to make that commitment. And of course, the veteran has to allow the program to communicate with their mental health care provider. And they provide written consent with family support. They also have to provide written consent to having somebody present if the dog has to be removed from their home. They have to have a face-to-face interview. So the programs are no longer, if you're doing PTSD dogs, you really have to have face-to-face interviews. I know there's a lot of programs out there that, fill out this form, we'll send you a dog, and we'll send you some videos, and voila, you have a PTSD dog. Awesome. There has to be follow-up every 3 months. These are minimum standards. You see how high they are in comparison to non-PTSD handlers? The team training, this is a biggie, to me anyway. The team training uses positive reinforcement and positive effect. In other words, they're not teaching the dogs the handlers how to correct their dogs. Because people with anger issues are liable to take that to a degree that they don't need to. So it does not include the use of corrections because that involves emotions of anger. Again, though, there's no emphasis on canine behavior, body language, common behavior problems, or behavior modification. So we're still missing that piece of the puzzle. But the dogs themselves for clients with PTSD, again, meet or exceed the normal standards, even of the ADI dogs. They have to have a tolerance to high levels of stress. I don't know if there's any definition of how to assess for that. I've never seen it. They have to have sensitivity without anxiety. These are needle in the haystack type of dogs, right? Complete tasks in very difficult and emotional situations. So there may be a lot of anger and screaming going on, but the dog still has to be able to do their task.
I guarantee you these dogs that Karen's talking about are harder to find than any of the dogs I ever looked for the job that I did.
Yeah. No reactivity, guarding behavior, or increased anxiety. You notice the emphasis here is on prevention. Preventing problems from occurring after placement. There's no requirement to meet those minimum standards. ADI, you don't have to join ADI, you don't have to be a member of ADI, you don't have to be certified through ADI, you don't have to be anything. Anybody can call themselves a service dog trainer, just like anybody can call themselves a behaviorist, right? We all run into that. So there's no requirements for handler applications, assessment training, follow-up, program interactions. They don't have to know anything about mental health, dog training, dog care. It doesn't matter. Anybody can call themselves anything because the field is very unregulated. Just like dog training is unregulated, so is this. They don't have to know anything about dog programs, the selection, the training, or even the placement. And that, I think, is why we are in trouble. Therapy dogs, where are we today? These are some of the, and I encourage you to go look at what the minimum standards are for assessing a therapy dog handler and team. The handler must be of good character. I don't know how you assess for that, but that's one of them. The therapy dog classes are not required, but we suggest you might take your dog to class. That's, that's as loose as some of the programs are out there. But some dogs do actually assess the relationship between the handler and the dog. They assess the dog's temperament. Again, I don't know what qualifications the people that are doing the assessments have. There's no regulation on that. Pet Partners actually does provide an online instructor, online or in-person instructor to talk about body language, which I thought that's awesome. Reading signals from therapy dogs, I'm assuming that's also some body language stuff. And infection prevention and control, so how not to get your dog sick or get sick from the people that you're seeing.
We were looking at this a few days ago and we started laughing. I'd rather somebody be a little bit of an ass and actually know something about dogs and behavior.
So let's talk about some of the common problems that we're having. I'll kind of skip through a lot of that stuff really fast because this is the meat of what we're trying to talk about. In service dogs, whether it's a dog for someone with PTSD or in general, these are the common problems. When I did all of my information gathering, my data gathering, these were the 3 most common problems that I was told about. Anxiety. Separation anxiety and generalized anxiety. In spite of what you are probably told, there are times when a service dog has to be left alone. It's kind of like placing that separation anxiety dog in a stay-at-home mom household. How many times have you heard that one from rescue groups? We need to place this dog with a stay-at-home mom because it gets a little anxious when it's left alone. I don't know about you, but stay-at-home moms are never freaking at home. They're driving kids to soccer and to basketball and to doctor's appointments and picking them up and dropping them off, and that dog is, they don't know if they're coming or going. That's about the worst place to place a separation anxiety dog. So separation anxiety dogs, I mean, again, this is the biggest problem that they have is generalized anxiety or separation anxiety. Dog-to-dog issues. And of the programs that I interviewed, most of those dog-to-dog issues have now been induced by trauma, meaning they have had an incident with another dog in public. And that's what I'm talking about when I say we are in trouble. I actually left the assistance dog field because I knew this was going to start happening. When we started having emotional support animals and there was no guidelines and there's no regulation of the industry and anybody can take a dog out in public. And when I started taking dogs out in public with my clients and they're getting barked and lunged at by the other dog that's also in the grocery store, I just went, you know what, I'm done with this. And sadly, that's when I got out of the business or got out of the industry. But the biggest reason that we're seeing dog-to-dog problems is because of injury or assault from another dog in public. Sometimes we have frustration. I really want to go say hi to that other dog. And that may go back to puppy raising. As a matter of fact, we talked about that with some of the programs, that the frustration is actually from puppies that either A, got to play with puppies too much and other dogs too much, and they don't realize that they don't get to play with puppies or other dogs all the time, or the ones that never had an opportunity to play. So it's a little bit of both. We don't know. And of course, reactivity and fear issues. I had a higher incidence of fear issues reported in the programs that do not utilize puppy programs, puppy raising programs, that are really raising dogs in the prison systems, because these dogs have never seen pictures on the wall, trash cans, washers, dryers. They're living in a prison. A lot of the prison programs now do have puppies on parole kind of sort of concepts, where people do come in and they take the puppies for the weekend or for the week, and they actually are exposing them to the real world. But these are the three most common problems with service dogs: is anxiety, dog-to-dog reactivity issues, and fear issues. With the therapy dogs, we still have the same dog-to-dog issues, and we have it for the same reasons. We also have handling intolerance. I think after a while, some of these dogs just go, yeah, if another person touches me there, I'm done. Yeah. And then, of course, we have those dogs that just go, I'm tired of this. They call it lack of enthusiasm. I'm doing it only because of mom, like the golden retriever I talked about earlier. I'll do it if mommy wants me to, but I'm really not into it. So some of the instructors that I know that supervise therapy dog programs, they told me that they're very much on the ball, and there are some organizations that actually do recertifications of their therapy dog teams. Some of them do not. And again, it's a crapshoot what you get, because there's no regulation in the field. And so the therapy dogs, sometimes they see, yeah, maybe your dog is just really not enjoying its job anymore. So what are some of the things that we can do? How do we decide what we can do with a dog with a problem behavior? Well, how severe is the problem? If any of you guys saw my In Whose Best Interest presentation yesterday, it's very similar. Some of the risk assessments that Dr. Packel was talking about earlier this morning, it's there too. It's the same concepts. It's about the handler. Availability of training assistance. You've got a dog out in the field. It's from an organization in another state. Is there a trainer close by? Is there a trainer that works for the organization or is available, like one of you guys? Is there a consultant there? Is that availability? Does the dog go back into the facility for training? Does it stay in the home? And of course, the capability and the competency of the handler are number one. Chris talked about it earlier this morning. It's about the handler more than anything. Do they have the physical ability, the mental fortitude to manage the dog? Management skills. Yeah, you need to not take your dog out in public anymore. Let's give it a little bit of time to reset, to detox. I can't do that. Maybe they won't do that. Maybe they emotionally can't do that. But that's the capability and the competency of the handler. Maybe if they had seen this coming a lot quicker before the problem got so severe, we wouldn't be in the boat that we're in now. But of course, they haven't been trained to observe body language, have they? And are they able to comprehend and implement a BMOD plan? So what do we do with these dogs? Well, we might reassign them. Is reassignment potential? When I work with a client, I actually had a client, we went through 3 dogs. Her first dog was sent to Texas, had allergy issues, she had to go somewhere else. Because in Texas, she had too many allergies, so we sent her somewhere else, and she was able to be repurposed, reassigned. Her second dog had high prey issues and reactivity issues, so we said bye-bye to that one, and she was actually reassigned as a demonstration dog. And her third dog, probably one of the best dogs I've ever worked with in my life. God, he was a great dog. So maybe we reassign the dog to a new handler because it's a different environment, or maybe the tasks can be modified. Or do we just have to career change the dog? Does that handler now no longer take that dog in public and it's an in-home working dog only? I know a lot of those. A lot of clients that I know that have had their dogs for a couple of years, and they developed problems working in public. They said, yeah, I'm not ready to give up my dog. I'll figure out a way to handle public access without him. And they keep the dog, and the dog works in the home. And then, of course, we have the dogs that do become demonstration service dogs or assistance dogs for field representatives and a pet home. Bob and I actually had, right when we first got married, I think, still doing service dogs. And I was kind of in between demonstration dogs. I had a golden retriever that I had rescued that was an amazing service dog, but he had had Ehrlichia when I first got him, and his kidneys were starting to be compromised, and the task of being my demo dog was pretty tasking. So I ended up rehoming him and was looking for a new demo dog. And the group sent me down this crazy son of a gun. And black dog, his name at the time was Quigley. And I remember looking out the back door, and we had a screen door, and Quigley was bouncing just like this. And mind you, I am now living with a man who has a dog that just came back from 9/11. I don't want to live with another one of those. And so I said, yeah, maybe we need to assess him for some other type of job. And he actually became a wilderness search and rescue dog. So we repurposed him again. He wasn't my demonstration dog, but he became a search and rescue dog. And of course, sometimes we place him into simple pet homes. Therapy dogs, they have to look at the severity of the problem. This is something that almost every person who managed a therapy dog program that I talked to said, the dog's teeth can't touch human skin, period, even if it's in play. If the teeth touch skin, the dog is gone. That could simply be an, oh wow, I have an itch. And they move their head and there's somebody's hand in the way. That means the handler really has to be right there at the front of that dog to handle that dog. Maybe the attitude changes. The dog is reluctant to interact, or they're interacting inappropriately. Maybe they're getting too pushy, they're in too many faces, they're kissing, licking, jumping on people. Some of that's training issues, of course. And of course, then can we just reassign them? If they're no longer good with little kids, maybe they'll be good with adults. Maybe they can't do the hospitals anymore, but maybe they can do hospice. So we can reassign and repurpose those dogs so that maybe they don't have the hands-on interaction, one age group over the other, the reading program, something that's really pretty sedentary. But when we do look at what we can do for service dogs, the first thing we go to is time out or time off, detox. Give the dogs a break. And if I were still in the industry, what I would probably be doing with these dogs with detox is I would probably be doing some scent work with them if they were not an alert dog. I'm not going to teach an alert dog to find birch or clove if they're supposed to be detecting diabetes or a specific allergy. But you can have them just hunt for food. So anyway, detox, do something fun with the dogs, remove it from the trigger. Maybe the dog has to go back to the training center where they might do something as common as desensitization and counter conditioning around other dogs if that's the issue. I do believe that anxiety is probably the hardest things for them to resolve because that will require typically supplements or pharmaceutical intervention. Not every program has a veterinarian on staff. In fact, very few do. And we all know that a lot of veterinarians just aren't up to speed on behavior meds. And there are only 72 veterinary behaviorists in the United States. So you can see the problem there, just do the math. Sometimes you have to do training in the field if you have a consultant like yourself or a trainer that's in the field. They also might be able to do desensitization and counter conditioning. Like Bob said, it's nothing sexy about behavior modification, is there? It's not like you see on TV, sadly. It's slow, if it happens at all. Same thing we're going to do with therapy dogs. The biggest thing they said is give your dog a break. Some of these dogs actually have, there's an organization or a chapter of one of the organizations in my area. They require their dogs to have mandatory breaks. Every year the dog actually has to have a 2-month break. I thought that was fabulous. Which means they remove them from the trigger, they get reassigned maybe. Again, desensitization and counter conditioning, use of supplement meds or pharmaceuticals. So in summary though, the biggest thing about service and therapy dogs is pick the right dog. The appropriateness of the dog selection is number one. The second variable of that team is what? The handler. They have to have the mental and physical competency to work a dog. And then if there's problems, they have to have that mental and physical capabilities, the skill and the knowledge to work through it. Have to have that availability for behavioral consultant help or trainer help. And of course, the dogs have to be able to be career changed if that is the next aspect. There's very limited behavior modification for severe problems. I remember when I was teaching my reactive integration class and I had somebody came to my orientation. My orientation is 3 hours. I limit my dogs to 6 in a class. They're all behind visual barriers. They all come in one at a time. And it was an organization, assistance dog organization. In fact, it was making assistance dogs easy. Well, that right there was pretty much a put off for me. But they had a poodle that was fearful and reactive. It was now 14 months old. I said, what is your goal for this dog? To put it to work with a client. I went, wow, your client needs help, not the dog. You should be able to put a dog with a client, and the client is the one that needs help in public, not the dog. Well, it pissed them off so much they never came back, and they wanted their money back, and I refused to give it. So again, these are organizations that are out there, and I think that there's a good reason for that. So we're going to let Bob take over, and we're going to have, we have about 20 minutes is all. Oh my God. We've got plenty of time. All right.
Okay, now the 80s brought us urban search and rescue dogs to the U.S., all right? They had been prolific in Europe for a while, and some other parts of the world. They'd been around quite a bit. Fairfax County Fire and Rescue outside of DC, that was the first organization to bring one on board. It stands to reason, they're right there by Washington, DC. Sponsored by Virginia Task Force 1. Just a second while I get dressed. So Fairfax County, I said that Virginia Task Force 1 sponsored them, but it's the other way around. All of the task forces in the country have a sponsoring agency. Metro-Dade Miami Fire Department, Fire Rescue, sponsored by Florida Task Force 1. Those were the first two. Their first deployment, disaster deployment, was the Mexico City earthquakes in 1985. It's kind of interesting, there was a NASAR convention going on as that happened. NASAR is the National Association for Search and Rescue, and their tagline is for both paid and unpaid volunteers. And they were actually having a convention when that happened. Somebody ran into the room and said, hey, earthquake just hit Mexico. Everybody got up out of the room, went and got in their cars, took their wilderness dogs and all down to Mexico, and did a lot of work to help. I know a couple of fire department guys from Texas that actually went down there. The first deployment with 24-hour coverage, that is a key phrase. 24-hour coverage was the Alfred P. Murrah building bombing in Oklahoma City in 1995. Okay, after that, then FEMA began to flourish. All right, they started to see how just important it was. I think when the Murrah building hit, I believe we had about 8 task forces, 8 or 9. So today there are 28 teams in the system. They're deployed typically for 10 to 30 days at a time. They told me early on when I started, it would be 10-day deployments. And then I think my second deployment, I was gone for 2.5 weeks. So it can be months or days in between. Okay, I got back from Oso, Washington, mudslide there, and actually was scheduled to go to Tennessee for some training. So my task force flew me out there, and I was looking at it as a great, fun trip for my dog who had just been through crap for the last 3.5 weeks. And we went out there and we were there for a couple of days, and some tornadoes hit the Little Rock, Arkansas area. They called me about midnight and said, hey, can we spin you up? We're gonna fly you to Little Rock to meet the task force. And I actually refused the mission because my dog was not ready to go out the door again. I would have gone, you know, I'm old and broken anyway, it wouldn't have mattered. But I wasn't gonna do that to my dog. And they understood, they totally understood. They were able to backfill my position with another human remains detection dog handler. Texas Task Force 1 is the most deployed task force in the country, and I put that down for a reason because I'm going to use one of our dogs as a case study later. The 2008 hurricane season spun Texas up 8 times in 1 year. All right. Karen, it was great. She had her boyfriend over all the time. I wouldn't, no, just kidding. Typically 12-hour shifts, sometimes 24-hour rotations. Okay. Deadly environments. Nasty, nasty environments. On-site veterinary care. I don't know what the hard and fast rule is with FEMA, but I typically would see long-term deployments more than 15 days that would historically have on-site care. I only recall VMAT, which was the veterinary mass unit on the federal level, being in place for 9/11 and Katrina, and they could have been at more stuff that I just didn't see. Thankfully, didn't need them. But those two events, they were certainly there. In Oso, Washington, we had 1 vet for 20 HRD dogs. All right, that is just amazing. We had to get up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning just to fix, you know, wrap cuts and stuff like that, to wrap paws. By the end of that deployment, my dog had 3 paws, 3 out of 4 wrapped. You know, it was a pretty tough environment. Texas Task Force 1, and I'm really proud of this, we actually have our own veterinary mass unit, and right now they only go on state deployments, and they're at every training. But, and this is the big B right here, there are no requirements of veterinarians to have any behavior or behavior modification training on the state or federal level. They actually require students as part of their fulfillment, I don't know what you'd call it, to graduate from Texas A&M from the veterinary school to serve time on this veterinary mass unit. Okay, that's part of their requirement, but they don't have any behavior training. Now, federal, state, USAR handlers receive 40-hour canine search specialist course, and most of it is spent learning about the testing and about learning, what it's going to be like in the disaster environment, which you're never prepared for. Behavior issues or behavior modification is not a topic. It's not something you even discuss, and there is no canine behavior curriculum. And with FEMA, I got hundreds, if not probably closer to 1,000, seriously, in my career, hours of peripheral training, everything from hazmat. We do swift water training. We did a lot of helicopter stuff. Texas is the only task force in the country that actually has their own helicopters. So we're number 10 in the nation from Denton, which is in North Texas, down past San Antonio. Everybody knows that's in South Texas, over to Houston in the world for flooding. Okay, this year we had a few floods down in Texas. Okay, you guys are aware of some of that stuff. So, but we had no behavior training, nothing. In handler training, awareness is beginning to take place. It's starting to, okay? I was one of the first handlers to actually use positive reinforcement-based training, to quit using compulsions. I was the first to certify any dog in 4 months. When I got on the task force, they asked me, this was a question, because they had fired a whole bunch of handlers because they weren't getting ready to meet the requirements of certification. And they asked me when we passed the assessment, they said, can you guarantee us that you will get your dog certified in a year? I didn't know any better. I said, sure. And I found out, like the second I walked out the door, that the norm was 1.5 to 2 years. I was stupid. Didn't know any better, all right? But the last one I did in 4 months. Okay, the training is very, very important. And now about 75% of the handlers in the task force, and this may not sound like a big deal to you guys, but you have to understand where we come from. Okay, remember we're a little bit hairy and we drag our knuckles, all right? The number of handlers asking Karen for help, okay, and I use this as a huge gauge, has gone off the chart. I got my feelings hurt at first because I'd have buddies of mine that do search and rescue. They'd call me and say, hey, could you have Karen call me? What? You don't want my help? No, they wanted to talk to my wife. She's better looking and smarter than me, so that's okay. But they're actually looking for help with some of these problems now, and that never happened before. Can you remember that happening? I mean, prior to probably 2012, 2013, I don't think that ever happened. Because of downtime for natural detoxification, canine PTSD, which I did find out, I talked to Dr. Berghart again over this. I said, well, what about a disaster dog? Because you say it has to be in a combat environment. And he said, well, your environments could be considered a combat environment with what you do, with your discipline. So he said, certainly in this situation, these dogs could have PTSD, but I don't know of a single case. It's not an issue. We typically have enough downtime in between. Most common issues are due to not recognizing, intervening, or responding to over-arousal. Dogs are different than they were 50 years ago, okay? We typically used to take dogs and we would pump them up, pump them up, pump them up, pump them up, because we could use compulsion to bring that drive back down, back down, back down, okay? Dogs are not like that now. They come out of the box hot, all right? We don't need to do all that pumping up and stuff like that. But there's still handlers that believe that you have to do that, so they spend a lot of time on the front end of the dog doing a ton of what we call dry building, all right? And they end up with these monsters, okay? All of my dogs, I do a ton of impulse control, all right? I'm not worried about the dog doing the job. I'm worried about in between, living with the dog. And then occasionally while the dog is doing the job, getting the dog to listen to me. So better practices in training and awareness are still needed for further mitigation of these issues. Let's look at a case study here. In 2014, Riot was a 14-month-old border collie sent to us with reactivity issues from Dory Donovan. Dory, actually at that time, she was with Massachusetts Task Force 1 right up the road. I think she lives in New Mexico now. But Riot had come to us for two things. Number one is directional control training, which I did, and some behavior modification work, which Karen did. Now, Karen set up a regimen involving click the trigger, parallel walking, and BAT. And a veterinary behaviorist that we worked with also started a regimen of fluoxetine. And Riot has since passed multiple certifications as a human remain detection canine. It's pretty cool. And I think, I don't know if Riot is still on medication or not, but she is. She's still doing the job. Now, we're going to show you a couple of videos here. This is actually some stuff that Karen took. That's Karen, that's our apprentice there with Karen, and of course Riot. And I'm going to let Karen kind of describe what's going on, and then I'll finish this up.
Basically all I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit of just parallel walking. Right now the dog is a little reactive to any person, and we're kind of confined because it's really nasty weather outside. So I came up with this idea. I couldn't get enough space parallel walking, so I added the obstacle of a ladder, and that gave her something else to focus on while we were doing parallel walking. It's just very simple. You just walk through. So it's basically using a little bit of classical conditioning. I'm walking, I'm thinking, I can't look at the other person and walk through the ladder at the same time. She's a little concerned. You can still see her looking over at our trainer. I'm also doing a lot of buffering. I'm putting myself in between the dog and the trigger. And here she starts to get a little bit iffy. I would really like to bite her butt, which at some point in time she did. We had to buy a new pair of jeans for our apprentice trainer. She put a little hole right in her rear end. You know, we make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So anyway, she's actually getting a little bit too aroused. She can't even think enough to walk through the barriers or the ladder anymore. So I'm actually having to do a little bit of a body block and working on some alternative behaviors of offering me some eye contact. Good girl. She gets cookies and cookies for all of that. So anyway, that's how I use parallel walking. I don't need to go through all of this because it's long. This is actually another potential USAR handler. This is us working with her after we had actually addressed some of the dog to people reactivity issues. She kind of went, oh, people are okay, but dogs suck. So we started having some issues. This is us in our front yard, and we're using another dog training handler with her dog. And I'm basically just doing some click the trigger. That's the best Great Pyrenees in the world. We lost her 2 years ago. Lovely dog. It's the one I was talking about her name earlier. So all I'm doing is if she looks at the trigger, look at the distance we have to be at this point. She's a little worried about Bob with the camera. So do you see the stiffening of the tail? There's an alert, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I interrupted it with the marker, and within 2 clicks, she basically said, yeah, I can look at the trigger and I can look back at you, and we're good. So that's what I call click the trigger.
Okay, so moving on. I want to talk to you about Canine Kinsey. This is another case study. This is my dog, all right? I acquired Canine Kinsey from DFW Lab Rescue in 2000, August of 2000. She was assessed using the Brownell Marseille Hahn Canine Assessment. This same assessment was used to test, I don't know, probably close to 1,000 contract dogs over between Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've had huge success with it. We took the same test, we modified it towards USAR, specifically for Texas Task Force 1, and it's actually become the benchmark. Kinsey only passed the aggression portion of this test because she got distracted. This is how stuff can go wrong during an assessment. I'd only had this dog for 2 weeks. I knew very little about her other than her drive was off the chart. All right, we had her out, had her on a tie out, had a dog walk about 20 feet away. As the dog entered the field, I think either a car horn honked or a door shut. She glanced over that way, missed the dog walking by. Started to come back the other direction. Somebody started to laugh over here. She turned around this way. She missed the dog the second time. I was sitting on the tailgate of a truck next to David Brownell, the first name up there, And David had already told me, because he had looked at the dog and he said, she's got something going on with other dogs. I don't know what it is yet. I hadn't really had her around other dogs. And he looked at me and he said, you may have just lucked out there. And anyway, she made it through. She passed this. At one of the Kenzie's first team training events, she ran 200 yards over a hill to attack another dog. She hadn't even seen it. Okay? She just scented it, took off. The other handler, she tried to attack it. The other handler blocked it, so nothing happened. Oops. Okay? By 2004, I had gotten away from e-collars, prong collars, and choke chains. I was a crossover trainer, and I was about to marry Karen, so I couldn't do any of that stuff anymore. She, I was committed at that point to figure out ways to do this without utilizing force. You got to keep in mind, I came from a pretty rough training background. I always practice, I consistently work to change her emotional response, classically conditioning exposure to other dogs. Very simple. All of this was simple, had to be. I did it. Desensitization and counter conditioning. I kept her from practicing bad behavior such as crate reactivity simply by covering the crate. Okay. By the end of her career, and this was pretty cool, we could board a van or a Black Hawk helicopter with other dogs in close proximity, and I didn't even have to put a muzzle on her. I was still vigilant, but I didn't have to put a muzzle on her. Kenzie's career included 7 federal deployments, including the World Trade Center and Katrina, 8 state deployments, over 50 local volunteer searches. She was one of the recipients of the PDSA Dickens Medal for Gallantry, which is an English award. That's the equivalent in this country of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And she was inducted into the Tarrant County Medical Veterinary Hall of Fame. But unfortunately, tragedy struck. This is Kenzie there in that picture. On January 7, 2007, she fell from a building. She said I wasn't going to do this. She broke her back in 2 places, and she was the first federal USAR dog in the U.S. to die in the line of duty. That sucked. So let's talk a little bit about where we are today. We're turning a corner. Remember, many of Karen's Texas seminars are attended by SAR handlers. As mentioned earlier, many USAR handlers, especially in Texas, they're diligently working to fix issues that they have or try to modify behavior. It's not just get a new dog anymore. Now let's talk a little bit about where we should be going. This is our wish list right here. We'd love to see no more military working dogs, USAR dogs, or law enforcement dogs still working in inherently dangerous jobs after 10 years of age. No military working dogs, USAR dogs, or law enforcement dogs to be recertified after 10 years of age. That way it'll give them time to plan to get replacements or successors. Mandatory for military working dogs, USAR dogs, or law enforcement dogs to retire no more than 90 days past the dog's 10th birthday. Texas already has something in place for that, and it's starting to go to some other states. Both of my last 2 dogs retired with me. Gracie just turned 10 and was due to recert in 90 days. Federal funding for organizations that do fostering and end-of-life management. I want to tell you a little bit about the Damien Project. This is one of those groups. Remember I said aftercare is the gauge for what we're doing now. It is the spotlight for humanity. Nonprofit dogs for end-of-life management, for military working dogs, law enforcement dogs, dogs like Damien, I mentioned in the first group. He was the devil dog of San Diego. This was done at the ranch of Crystal Ann Tronball that I talked about in the first one, and her husband. And it's Damien on his 4th deployment. This is a retirement ride home, and Damien after 2 years. He unfortunately passed away not too long after that second picture. Now, Damien went on to live another 2 years. 19 dogs, including Kira, the other dog that I mentioned earlier, have lived expanded, and I use that word, it's not supposed to be extended, it was expanded lives because of this. Kira lived to the age of 15. One of these dogs went on to earn titles in IPO. Several have participated in dock diving and have earned titles. And this is Kira at the age of 15, and she actually had to be euthanized about 2 days after that picture. Okay, Crystal, this is the biggest part of this, guys. This is the gal, her intuitiveness is incredible. She said the way that she got through this is she learned to never say no to a dog, figure out the way to modify the dog's behavior where the dog says yes. How frickin' simple is that? She'd often hang a bite sleeve on her shoulder. She wasn't stupid in case stuff went wrong. She could whip it around and take a bite. Damien had his own, this little side note, 12 by 12 foot run complete with dedicated AC heat and his own TV. Crystal couldn't tell me in scientific terms anything she had done, but it's all very simple stuff you can see here. And of course, she had the love and a very understanding husband. Now, federal funding for veterinary care, including treatment of behavior issues for the life of the canine. All right, we may need to mitigate issues, but we need to hold them responsible. They can put a lot of money into it now or put a whole lot of money into it later. We can roll it into projects like the Damien project. And education, including behavior modification, is a mandated curriculum for military and USAR handlers, both state and federal. Contractors need to be held to the same standard, okay? Right now, it's iffy. They get away with a lot of stuff.
And service dogs need to be able to adhere to minimum standards regarding the client and handler training, canine selection. Again, like I said earlier, there is no requirements, there's no standards. Service and therapy dog organizations certainly need to be aware of the client handler curriculum. There isn't any when it comes to behavior and behavior modification. Definitely need to encourage organizations that provide temperament assessments for the therapy dog field to assess the handler. Remember, it's a team sport. Service dogs, therapy dogs, they're teams. They are one and the same. And of course, organizations such as the IAABC need to keep the momentum going. We need to offer our services. We need to start promoting better education. And like my husband's favorite philosopher says, some of you are too young to know who Yoga Bear is, but if you don't
It's not the cartoon bear, okay, it's somebody else.
Yeah, it's the baseball dude, yes. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else.
That's it. Thank you, guys.